Sports cards have been incredibly hot, but non-sports cards, Marvel, Star Wars, and others, they've been even hotter. Today, we dive in and tell you how you can make some money. My name is Jeff Wilson. By day, I invest in tech companies, and at night, I invest in sports cards. Join me on my journey to profit from the hobby we all love. Hello, sports card investors! Or should I say, non-sports card investors, because that is what today's show is all about. We always talk about sports cards on this channel, but we cannot ignore the heat of the non-sports card markets any longer. So we're diving in today and getting you primed on what is going on with Star Wars cards and Marvel cards and Pokemon and WWF cards, wrestling cards and Garbage Pail, and more importantly, what might be next? Where's the heat next? Because it has been quite the trend of people jumping into these non-sports card markets and the cards going crazy in price. And I'm going to show you today, using Market Movers data, how crazy the price increases have been across many of these non-sports cards. And then we're also going to talk about what is next and what could get hot in the future, so that hopefully we can get ahead of the trend. You can hop on the next thing before the trend has already occurred. By the way, I should mention that in our Sports Card Investor app, we've now added in wrestling cards. So WWE, WWF, there's not a ton of them because there's not a ton of them out there graded, that type of thing, but we've added in a lot of the big names. You can get to wrestling cards now in the Sports Card Investor app. Click the little search icon in the lower right, and it allows you to filter by sport, filter by wrestling as your sport, and you'll be able to check out all these different wrestling cards in the Sports Card Investor app. Of course, we'll add more and more. And sometime in the future, we may also add Star Wars, Marvel, all of those other things, Pokemon. But today, if you are a Market Movers user, you can actually chart those things now inside Market Movers. And in today's episode, I'll also show you how you can do that. All right, for this discussion, I wanted to bring in two experts in the non-sports card world. I'm bringing in from our team here at Sports Card Investor, our Director of Operations, Hammer. And I'm also bringing in a great YouTuber, Rob, from Northeast Ohio Sports Cards. You may have seen the Northeast Ohio Sports Card YouTube channel. It's good stuff. And Rob's been talking a lot about non-sports cards on that channel recently. They're both going to come on now, and we're going to have a great discussion. So without further ado, welcome these guys to the show. Rob and Hammer, welcome to Sports Card Investor.
How's it going, guys?
Hey, how's it going? How's everybody doing today?
Super excited to have you guys. Now, a lot of the viewers probably have seen Hammer before. Hammer is our Director of Operations here at Sports Card Investor, and he's been on the show in the past. Rob is a new face to some of you, but he has a great YouTube channel of his own where he puts out really impressive content. Rob, tell the viewers about that.
Yeah, Northeast Ohio Sports Cards. Do a little mix of sports cards, and then have been diving into the non-sports card craze. Most of my roots are in the basketball world. That's kind of where I got my focus, but things have been going crazy lately, so I've been trying to expand into some alternative markets.
Yeah, and I've been watching Rob's channel. He puts out really good content, and it was some of his content over the last couple of weeks about non-sports cards specifically that made me say, okay, I know this is Sports Card Investor, but we can't ignore what's happening in the non-sports card market anymore. There's so many interesting things going on there, and that's why I wanted to bring Rob on, as well as Hammer, and put together this episode today. So let's jump right in, and I want to show right off the bat, this is just indicative of the craziness that is currently going on. I just brought up in Market Movers a graph of what is happening with Pokemon cases from McDonald's. You've got sale after sale of these Pokemon cases that are selling for over $750, upwards of $1,000. And you can see there's a ton of sales of these here. And this is like, what is this? Is this McDonald's employees who are like taking these boxes that are supposed to be going into kids' Happy Meals and they're like taking them out the back door of the store and sticking them on eBay? Like, what's going on with this craziness?
It's wild right now. I think they have like 2 limit Happy Meals per cars and stuff like that now. I never thought I would live to see the day where people were flipping Happy Meals. Like, where have we gone?
Where have we gone? And it is a wild time. Of course, you know, when we talk about non-sports cards and how hot they have become, Pokemon kind of started that craze really over the course of the last year. Pokemon got really, really hot. But then in recent months is when we've seen other types of non-sports cards heat up. And we're not really going to talk much about Pokemon today because that's already been covered on other channels for several months now extensively. But I do want to talk much more so about some of the cards that have really heated up more in recent months. One that has certainly caught our attention here at Sports Card Investor is wrestling cards. And so, you know, wrestling, WWF, WWE, like it's kind of this interesting middle ground between, you know, is it sports cards? Is it non-sports cards? Like, call it what you want, but we have loaded several wrestling cards now into market movers, into our popular card charts. And so I can show you just briefly what's been happening with these. So you've got, like, this is the 1982 cards, and these are kind of real low population, really rare stuff. And I know that's a theme we're going to talk about how a lot of this stuff is really low population stuff. And you can see actually here within market movers, like we're talking like Pop 57, Pop 47, Pop 40 for some of these, like 1982 Andre the Giant card, you know, Ric Flair card. We can go up to 1985 where you get a lot of Hulk Hogan cards. And these are, again, like populations around 100 in different grades. And look at how they have taken off over the course of the last few weeks here. I mean, you know, for example, this Hulk Hogan 1985, you know, blue card in PSA 9 back in November, that card was $300. That card just sold for $2,300 a couple of weeks ago. So from $300 to $2,300 over the course of a couple months, that's a 654% increase. That is outpacing the increase of Kobe and LeBron and all of the basketball players who we've been talking about who have been going crazy over the last few months. You see it with other guys too. This is the Undertaker's cards from 1991. And you can see how, again, very low population count. I mean, super low pop, like pop 10. But you can see this few sales that there have been. These things have gone wild. I mean, you know, Rob, what are your thoughts on this? Like, what are your thoughts on wrestling cards?
Wrestling in general, I think it's a big nostalgia play, and I think you touched on it. I think the population counts are key, as we've been seeing just in the modern NBA market recently. To kind of touch on sports cards, the trend has been the last 2 months. I want low population all-time greats, and the money kind of shifted there away from high pop modern. So I think people are starting to look at other asset classes, if you will, and they're seeing like, hey, this Hulk Hogan card, all-time legend, you know, one of the most popular wrestlers ever. Everyone watched him growing up. And you just glance at it and you see that, like you just said, there's only so many of these things that exist. And especially on those, like, I don't think you're finding too many sealed boxes of those laying around right now to break and send in the PSA. So those specifically, I don't see those population numbers getting a whole lot higher over the next, 6 months to a year. People are sending stuff in the PSA. And I think the nostalgia drive is really what's pushing people in these directions.
Yeah, and Hammer, I'm curious to get your perspective. Is it the nostalgia? I mean, that is a powerful factor. Do you think, and I know you're into non-sports cards, Hammer. I know you've got a lot of Marvel and Star Wars. We're about to talk about that, but is it nostalgia that's driving it for you? Is that why you think a lot of this is becoming popular? Or is it just people wanting to find the next opportunity to flip something for a profit?
I think some of it does have to do with nostalgia. And I think some of it also does have to do with flipping. I think we're getting into a particular area, at least with this vintage craze lately, where a lot of people are going and trying to look for the greatest of all time in that particular space. So in this case, you're seeing it with some of the wrestlers like Hulk Hogan, Undertaker, and Andre the Giant, who are legends within that sport. So it seems like people are just essentially going down the line, whether it's wrestling or music or something different that maybe hasn't been tapped into yet, where I think folks are trying to find that opportunity to maybe find, an extra buck or two that they can make down the road off of individuals who might want to buy that because of that nostalgic aspect of them pulling that 1982 card when they were a kid, or they went to see Andre the Giant wrestle growing up, and they know that that's a card they've always wanted to have. So I do think it's a combination of both. But I also think it has to do with people trying to tap in and trying to find those greats in those different spaces. Just like we've seen with basketball, baseball, football, and the main sports, where a lot of these all-time greats have quickly gotten absorbed up and have skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's the iconic card chase, but the iconic cards aren't necessarily just sports cards anymore, right? And that leads us into talking about Marvel, because there are a lot of iconic figures in Marvel Universe, characters, obviously. And I know Marvel cards, Hammer, is something that you have been into. I want to show a couple of graphs real quick here before we dive in, just to show people the heat around Marvel Universe. And although, by the way, we don't have Marvel Universe within Market Movers officially, you can still use the features like chart sealed wax and chart any card to chart Marvel Universe or any other type of non-sports card. So here I've used chart sealed wax to look at a search of 1990 Marvel Universe boxes. And so, I've just done that there, and you can see here. Now I had to go down into the actual results to remove some, click the little trash icon to get rid of some results that weren't like legit to the search. But it just takes a minute to clean it up, and then you get a real accurate graph and change percentages and everything. And guys, what we're seeing is that these Marvel Series 1 sealed boxes from 1990, they were, around $300 back in December, a little bit between $300 and $400 in December. They spiked all the way to a high of almost $3,200 about 2 weeks ago. They're now down a little bit. They're now sitting somewhere around $1,800 or so. Just an incredible rise. And we've seen it not just in the sealed boxes, we've seen it in some of the individual cards as well. Here I've used chart any card within Market Movers to look up Stan Lee. You think you need to put in a player name there, but you can really put in a character name, whatever you want to put in. I put in Stan Lee 1990 Marvel Universe PSA 9 and did a search on that. And this card has gone crazy, right? This was a card that back at the beginning of January was less than $200, and now in PSA 9 is well over $600, approaching $700. The PSA 10s have gone even more nuts, but there's very few of those. Tell us, Hammer, we'll start back with you. Tell us about Marvel, because I know this is something that you personally have been into.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space, in my opinion. You have one side of it where you have a lot of comic book lovers and individuals that grew up reading the comics and that were collecting a lot of these 1990 Marvel Universe, 1991 Marvel Universe as a kid. So you do see, a certain amount of fans that do like the comic book aspect. And then there's another side of it where you have maybe individuals like me around my age group who remember when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was initially launched and have watched all of those movies up to this point. So a lot of it as well is individuals like myself who have seen these movies growing up, which has now brought me into the comic book world and into the trading card world itself. So with where it's been and where it's going, to me, is extremely fascinating. And I think Upper Deck is also doing a great job out how they've been continuing to propel with these newer sets that are coming out in correlation to the movies and to the comics and the artists that are making, that are illustrating the comics.
And you sound, Hammer, pretty bullish that this, run on Marvel is going to continue, that this isn't just a flash in the pan. What makes you feel strongly about the future of Marvel cards?
Well, one reason is because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before January 14th, there was about a 16-month dry spell where they didn't have any content. So from my viewpoint, I looked at it as, well, this is going to be kicking off at some point. And once it does start up again, they're going to continue to be pushing out content for 1, 2, 3, 4 years at a time. So, and if you look in some of those chart any cards, you can probably notice that January 14th, right around that area, is where some of the spike starts to begin on some of those cards and some of that wax, because WandaVision has been on since January 14th. So I do think that with Disney Marvel, Disney Plus, them putting out content is going to continue to keep folks interested because it's going to be on the television. It's going to be in front of them to watch, just like we like to watch Zion on Saturday night, or we like to watch Tom Brady Sunday night on NFL football. So it's a similar concept. So, and with WandaVision ending, there will be another show starting March 19th, which is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So it also could be, with the propelling of the shows, it could also then set up other characters to potentially see spikes for their markets, whether it be their cards or their comics. So that's where I think this can be interesting, and it's almost a way you can study the market like you would for athletes for games, or for in season, off season, and things of that nature.
That's really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, that's a cool perspective. I guess Marvel characters, they don't retire and they don't tear their ACL, right? So in that sense, they're kind of like Tom Brady, right? So it's kind of one to one. You can invest in Spider-Man, you can invest in Tom Brady, and you've got pretty much the lifetime of that player there. That's really fascinating stuff, and I suspect that I know some big comic book collectors and investors, and even though I'm not very into comics myself, they say that the comic market is really driven by the release of new feature films. And so, I mean, it just makes sense that Marvel cards could be affected in the same way. Rob, what's your perspective on kind of where we are with Marvel cards right now and where Marvel cards might head?
I think we are I agree with Hammer. We are kind of at like the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I do expect prices to pull back a little bit as more stuff comes back from PSA. But I think as we all know, PSA is not fast right now. And does demand outpace PSA returns? People have just been starting to figure this out. The first wave got in, but I do think it's beginning to spread. I was at just a very small local card show just last week, and I saw Marvel 90 Universe cards in a showcase. They weren't graded, and then I saw someone else walking around asking if anyone was buying Marvel singles. And, if you went back even 3 weeks ago, that would have been unheard. You would have been looked at like you were crazy walking around a card show talking about Marvel, and now all of a sudden it's kind of accepted. So you could see it start to bleed in, and I don't know that everyone's realized quite yet exactly what's going on over there. And like Hammer said, Marvel's the biggest IP in the world. They basically print money, shows, etc. This is not leaving the front of our faces anytime soon. So just like in sports, news kind of drives a lot of price spikes and stuff. A guy gets traded, prices spike up. In this case, like Hammer said, a new show comes out, price is going to go up, demand's going to go up, interest is going to go up, and Disney's not going to stop making Marvel stuff anytime soon.
Yeah, certainly not after what they paid to acquire, that whole franchise some time ago. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, your point about the population counts and the grading is an interesting one. I have a good friend who called me up about a week ago because he, of course, caught wind, as many people are, of how Marvel cards in particular have exploded in value and popularity over the last month. And he called me up and he said, I have a huge collection, hundreds and hundreds of Marvel cards from my childhood, 1990, 1991, all in really good condition. And he's like, I need to get all these graded. He's like, but I got hundreds of cards I need to get graded. And so I suspect that there's probably many people across America right now having that same conversation and that same thought. So, when we see population counts rise, which we will, are you concerned about that, Rob? Or do you feel like, they're so low right now that the demand is just going to continue to outpace even what may be a flood of cards going in for grading?
I do think the demand, if it catches fire like it is and it keeps going, is going to potentially outpace PSA. Plus, and I've been talking about this a lot on my channel, for the people that aren't necessarily have been in the sports card world and they're running into a YouTube video or whatever, and they're seeing that these Marvel cards that they've been sitting on for a while are going crazy, that they make sure that they educate themselves on grading. One of my biggest fears here is that a lot of people are going to throw a lot of money at grading companies, and they're not used to the grading process like those of us that live in the sports card world is. And I cracked a brand new fresh box last week on my channel, and the number of PSA worthy cards I got, and these were packed fresh, was not high. these were cards built and designed for kids. The quality control is not great. There's a lot of centering issues on it. And even if you had these things stored in a box or a binder for the last 30 years and you haven't touched them, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be PSA 10s right out of the sleeve or right out of the card page. So, yes, population counts are going to go up. I think where the values are going to hold are in the PSA 10s, and as you're always a big advocate of, the sealed wax. The interesting thing with the sealed wax market is it has pulled back a little bit the last few weeks, or the last week or two. I'm curious to see what happens projecting forward. So using 90 Marvel Universe as an example, a lot of these have sold the last 2 to 3 weeks. More so have sold in the last 2 to 3 weeks than have sold in the last 2 to 3 months combined. And a lot of people are buying those to rip to grade. So as that inventory continues to decrease, these are 30-year-old boxes. What does the sealed wax inventory look like in even a month to 2 months from now? And what do the prices go back up on those? So I think that's also a pretty safe play here, even if you never rip a pack or send anything off to the PSA. Just sitting on the boxes, like I said, like you'd love to do.
Yeah, I do love that strategy. Obviously, ripping the boxes and figuring out what cards to send into PSA and everything like that can be a lot of fun. It's also a much larger risk because, as you said, ripping a brand new box, you don't know what you're going to get within it. And even if you get some really good stuff, you don't know that it's going to be well centered, and you don't know what it's going to grade at. And of course, then you got the delays in grading. I love, buying the sealed boxes, sitting on the sealed boxes, reselling the sealed boxes when the market starts to move upwards. But of course, there's a lot of different strategies and approaches you can take. Hammer, I know you've been buying personally some. I don't know if you have any there with you, but has it been this like 1990, 1991 early stuff? Or I know you've also talked about some of the more recent sets, which haven't, seen as much of a spike yet, but I think you think that there's some value there as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. And to his point, I do think they are going to get flooded. PSA is going to get flooded with a lot of that 90s and 91 Marvel Universe stuff. And to his point, it'll be interesting to see how much of it actually does, get a gem in 10 because some of the centering issues that they have had. But even something that me and you experienced, Jeff, in our advent calendar box break, we opened up 2013 Marvel Retro. So, and those have precious metal gems in them. And I have one here that is a Falcon, and it's numbered to 100. So this is something that's more of a little bit newer, but something that pays homage to a lot of the 90s sets for basketball and football that have the precious metal gems, the jambalayas and things like that are the really rare pulls. So I do also think that adds another level of scarcity on some of the modern stuff in terms of getting the 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. So I do think that there is an extra level of scarcity with these precious metal gems, because as you also progress into the more newer years, they have ones that are numbered to 199, numbered to 99, all the way down to essentially 5. So I do think that there's a lot of opportunity as well in the modern side of Marvel, as well as some of that 90s vintage stuff. But I love the 90s stuff, so that's also why I'm partial to collecting some of the precious metal gems and the jambalayas of these awesome characters that I grew up watching on the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, and you mentioned that box break we did when we were doing all the charity box breaks back in December. We had that one box in there that was a Marvel box from, I think you said 2013 Fleer. And it was funny because at the time, a lot of the audience commented like, what is this? This isn't sports cards. Who cares about Marvel cards? I think some of that audience, they might be going like, oh, wait a minute. We pulled from that box, we pulled a Precious Metal Gems Wolverine card. I believe it was numbered to 50. It was a blue Precious Metal Gems card. It was fabulous. Hopefully our video editor here can find that clip. Hopefully you're seeing it right now on the screen of that pull, because that was a beautiful card. We sold that, of course, right away back in December. And I think it sold for $400 and something because we were giving all the money to charity. So that's why we sold it right away. Although I do have to wonder, if we had sold that same card today, what that might have gone for compared to what it even went for back in December. So yeah, that's the precious metal gems within the Marvel stuff. That's certainly a really interesting combo to keep your eye on. Let's move from Marvel to Star Wars. I know this is another, interesting area. I've got some good friends who have been investing heavily in Star Wars. I wanted to show here, I'm using Chart Any Card and Market Movers to look at Luke Skywalker's 1977 Star Wars in PSA 9. And I mean, look at this thing take off, guys. I mean, this is his Wonder Bread variation, the #1 Wonder Bread. I put in Wonder here into other terms to include. And this thing has taken off from, at the end of December, this was a $50 card in PSA 9, $50 to $60. This card just sold for over $1,000, over $1,100. A card that was 50 or 60 bucks back in December. That's a 2,000% increase in 30 days. When you hear something like that, all the craziness we've seen around Michael Jordan cards, they actually pale in comparison to this from a percentage standpoint. By the way, I'll mention to the Market Movers users out there, if you want to track cards and wax of these, of Star Wars or Marvel or whatever, you can do a search like this and Chart Any Card or Chart Sealed Wax, but then save your search. Just come up here and save this as the 1977 Luke Skywalker card and hit save, and it will actually save it to your save search list. So in the future, even though these aren't in our popular card charts, in the future with one click, you can reactivate that search and see what all of these cards are worth. You can also add them to your collection in Market Movers, even though, we don't have them on the popular card charts yet, you can still add them to your collection from Chart Any Card or Chart Sealed Wax. Let's talk about Star Wars. Hammer, I think you got some there. I know I think you've been into some of these Series 1 cards. Is that right?
Actually, it's my father. He's the one that got these back in 1977. So,
wow.
And sent them to me once, we knew that this was something that we were going to be talking about. So, and from what he told me, he got them at a card show, and they've been sitting in the same box ever since. So I can imagine there's a lot of other folks my father's age who are running to their, storage areas and finding these sets. So it's really fascinating that they actually they had 5 series in this first 1977 set. So they had the first series, and then once Star Wars exploded, they knew that they had to make more. But the first series is absolutely phenomenal because of the stars that they have, and that's something that's just unique to the first series compared to the other 4 that don't have that. But The Mandalorian was recently out on Disney Plus, so I do think that has helped recently, just like Marvel with Star Wars cards starting to heat up. I also was looking at recently Topps Living of Baby Yoda for Mandalorian. That has recently been going up crazy. I think a PSA 10 sold for $500 recently. It was going for maybe 100 or 200 at some point prior to then. So I do see a similar parallel with Marvel, as in Disney is going to continue to put out shows. Mandalorian will have another season. They are making a spin-off show of Boba Fett for Disney Plus. So there's going to be 2 additional Star Wars shows coming, as well as, I believe, some more movies. So I think all of that news coming out is starting to have people start to research more into the Star Wars cards, and specifically the vintage stuff, because that's where it all started. I know that Star Wars, when that set came out, it was a pretty big deal for the non-sports card world at the time. So I think with that, it set a lot of precedent, and a lot of those folks who collected those, to Rob's point, have that nostalgic aspect and either want to spend top dollar to get that in a grade they want, or are going into their storage areas like my dad did to find it and then send them off to grading.
Yeah, wild stuff. And that's an amazing first series Star Wars collection you have there. Those cards looked like they're in incredible condition for 1977. So kudos to your dad for preserving those so well over the years, and I look forward to seeing what those come back graded at when you send those off. Rob, any perspective from you on Star Wars? What are your, is it similar to Marvel in your book? Is this a good long-term thing, or where do you think we are with Star Wars?
Yeah, I think it is very similar to Marvel, and I think, like Hammer said, you could kind of almost rinse and repeat the same points that you make about Marvel. I mean, Marvel and Star Wars are the 2 largest IPs in the world, basically. They're not going anywhere. There's nostalgia vibes. There's limited pop counts on the older stuff. And then, as Hammer mentioned, you have the newer Star Wars Topps Living sets coming out. and the Baby Yoda on that going for, you know, $500-600 in a PSA 10, and those are pretty limited because I think it's kind of like Topps Project 2020. I know it's a bad word here, but you know, they were just printed for that week, and however many people bought them. So even some of those modern Topps living cards a year ago, 6 months ago, they would sell 1,000 to 2,000, I think, on a lot of those. And how many of those are going to be PSA graded now? But you have a very small, short print run on those to begin with, looking at it from the modern perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Well, of course, you know, we've seen these gains in Star Wars and Marvel and Pokemon and wrestling and all these other things, but people are, obviously everybody wants to think about like what's next. And we've seen Garbage Pail, you know, kids go up. I know, Rob, on your show, you were mentioning that you've started to see movements in like Disney cards and G.I. Joe much more recently. Like what else is happening out there, Rob? And what might the future hold in terms of, you know, what gets hot next?
Right now, the speculation market on this stuff is nuts. Basically, anything that's a sealed wax box from probably the late 80s to early 90s has just been going crazy lately. G.I. Joe cards, like you said, Disney cards. I've seen lots of people speculating on music cards lately. I have little to no knowledge in that market, but a lot of people are thinking music cards could be big in the future. This is the most run Impel Marketing's probably gotten in 30 years because they produced a lot of this stuff. But you know, I think the possibilities are endless right now, and a lot of it is spec, which gets a little dangerous because you could get yourself into some trouble. We don't know where it could go. So if you got in at the bottom, I think you're doing pretty good. But I would be careful chasing a lot of this stuff and make sure you do your homework before you just run out and blindly buy, you know, every 80s and 90s wax box sitting on a flea market table or anything crazy like that.
And you made a good point on your show, Rob, about how with something like Marvel and something like Star Wars, there are some graded cards out there which are selling, you know, PSA 10s, PSA 9s, and you can see the price leaps in the graded cards, which then help substantiate the price leaps in the wax. And oftentimes they correlate, right? If a graded card sells for a record price, all of a sudden the wax jumps up, you know, the following day. But with some of the more speculative cards, like the music cards or something like that, in some cases, there's not even any graded cards out there or any type of recent sales to base any assessment over what a fair value for a sealed box might be. So it really is a little bit more of a shot in the dark, and you're taking kind of a speculative chance on where you think these things could go. And also, if some of these cards get graded, what they will actually do as individual cards, graded cards on the secondary market.
For sure, yeah. I mean, like you said, it could get really dangerous here with you don't know what it's going to go with, and the problem is the PSA is so backed up that it's not like you're going to get these things back to find out. So you're either going to grade them at a low risk price point at $10 to $20 a card and get them back in a year, and who knows what things look like in a year. Or you're going to really risk it, and you may, you know, pay $75 to $200 to get a card graded and get it back quickly, and kind of maybe you set the market, and maybe, you know, you could get a really good price to have the first. You're one of the few, like, you know, Storm Shadow or Snake Eyes cards from G.I. Joe, or, you know, some music card, one of the first ones to market at a PSA 10, and you could kind of set the market, but it could also backfire on you for sure. But sometimes you got to take risks.
Yeah, it definitely is kind of high risk, high reward. Trying to chase what the next trend is in the sports card or trading card world in general is kind of a high risk, high reward approach. If you're right, it can really pay off. And well, I mean, as you can see, if you predicted Star Wars cards were about to blow up back in December, you could literally have had a 2,000% gain on your investment in less than 60 days. I mean, that's crazy, but it takes the gumption to say, I think these are going to blow up. I'm willing to drop a whole lot of money into an area that for the last many, many years has been kind of ignored, you know, not really regarded. I mean, you know, you were saying, Rob, like at card shows, like people would have laughed you out of the building if you wanted to, you know, talk about Marvel and have a big Marvel display a couple months ago. But now, of course, you know, the whole world has changed and everybody's chasing those cards. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Hammer, I'm curious to get your perspective. I know actually both you and Rob have a thought around the possibility that some of this could spill over into comics, and comics are pretty low pop, and maybe, people have been collecting and investing in comic books for years, but I don't know that the comic book industry has seen the ferociousness of the sports card and trading card speculators, flippers, investors really hit it yet, right? What are your thoughts on that, Hammer?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to the content. With not too many movies and content being pushed out, it kind of paused the market, in my opinion, just because, as like we've said before, these movies sometimes will drive that comic book market. So an example I can give you is The Eternals, which is a new movie that's coming out this year, but it's been pushed back. I think it was supposed to come out sometime last year. So I know folks that have bought in all of those comics waiting for the movie to come out. And with obviously everything that's been happening over the past year, it's been continuing to get pushed back. So they're still holding them for when that movie gets released, to hope that it's going to start to drive the price up. So, and I do think that those sorts of things will start to happen, and they've probably already happened with some of Vision or some of Scarlet Witch's early comic books and things of that nature. So I do think it is going to spill over, just as similar with almost sports right now, sports cards and starting lineups. If you look at some of the starting lineups and some of the great players right now, they're going for hundreds of dollars. They never used to go for that. So I just think it is also people trying to find those untapped markets, and comic books is definitely one that's huge. And as these movies start to get rolled out, I think that's going to help bring more attention to them.
Fascinating stuff. And Rob, I know you're talking a lot about this type of thing now on your YouTube channel. Why don't you tell everyone again how to follow you, and then any closing thoughts from your end?
Best place to catch me is on the YouTube channel. It's any Ohio sports cards, so Northeast Ohio sports cards, and then you can get all of my other information from that. But yeah, I do think this is going to keep going, these alternatives from sports cards, and I do agree with Hammer that I think the comic book market could be next. I loosely follow that market. It has seen record gains just like the sports card market has, but to your point, Jeff, I don't know that they're ready for a full-blown blitz from the sports card world. So I would be very curious to see where this all goes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. Any final thoughts from your side, Hammer?
There's one thing I would say is that with Marvel and Star Wars, if you're curious if there is a demand, just to look at the viewership and some of the records that have been broken for the amount of individuals that have actually went to go watch Avengers Endgame or Star Wars. So that can just give you somewhat of an idea of the potential and the amount of individuals that maybe would be willing to start to collect these sorts of cards as these sort of box office records continue to get broken with Star Wars and Marvel films.
Yeah, I mean, you could absolutely make the argument, and it might not be an argument, it might be a fact that the, Star Wars and Marvel fan bases are larger than the fan bases of any of the professional sports leagues. So, we're all collecting basketball cards on the back of NBA being a global game and, NBA rising in popularity and all this type of stuff. Well, yeah, but, there's probably more people internationally watching Star Wars and watching Marvel, and all that type of thing. I don't know that for sure, but I imagine that's true when the numbers play out. So you're right. If the general masses, of those fan bases start to get pulled back in again, watch out. These numbers that we see today, while they look crazy compared to where they were, 90 days, 60 days, 30 days ago, they may look like nothing compared to where they could be 6 months, a year from now, if that type of thing starts to happen. So, guys, this has been a fascinating conversation. Appreciate the insights. I know the audience is going to appreciate it as well. Rob and Hammer, thank you for joining Sports Card Investor. All right, that was a fun discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, to follow along in the non-sports card world, you can do two things. First of all, within the Sports Card Investor app, you can see wrestling cards right now. Download this app. It's free in the App Store. Simply search for Sports Card Investor in the App Store to download that for free. And subscribe to Market Movers, where, as I showed you during the episode today, you can chart any type of non-sports card or non-sports card sealed box. You can go to sportscardinvestor.com and click on Market Movers in the main menu bar for more information. And if you sign up today, you get instant access to all of those features. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Please give this channel a subscribe. Hit that little bell icon if you haven't already. Every subscriber makes a difference. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you back in a couple of days with our next episode.